An infant is dead at the hands of an abusive caregiver, and a social worker's been arrested in connection with the case. Taiwan most changes to its policies to prevent future tragedies.
这个说法我们没有办法接受，把安置的责任转借给本案失孕的保姆，这个保姆是由他们来选择的。
After a spate of high-profile incidents of police brutality, protesters outside Taiwan's legislature are calling for more to be done to protect Taiwan citizens.
An alternative to invasion. What would happen if China blockaded Taiwan?
And we'll just assume it was 40% successful. So we're not talking 100%, 40% successful. That would be cost 2.8 trillion on the global economy, and that's the equivalent of about 2.8% of global GDP.
Plus, a brewing controversy. Why plans to convert a beer factory into a university campus isn't going down easy for some. Hello and welcome. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. Both Taipei and New Taipei are set to tighten the monitoring of nannies and the groups that hire them. That's after an infant died after being placed with an abusive caregiver. John Van Trieste reports.
It's been 3 months since a 1-year-old boy called Kai Kai, who was set to be put up for adoption, died from abuse by his nanny. But shock over his death isn't going away. The NGO handling his adoption is facing public anger. Its board members have held a press conference to apologize, and they hope to clear their organization of blame.
这个保姆之前跟我们契约照顾的前面的一个孩子还算正常，所以才会第二个社工人员没有办法有事先警觉，非常的内疚。
The organization says checkups in the first 3 months went smoothly, making the child's death in the 4th month a surprise. But the facts of the case are still in dispute. In addition to the nanny, a social worker is facing charges of falsifying documents and negligent homicide. The boy's family says the social worker brushed aside photos showing bruises on his head and missing teeth, with the social worker reporting that he had fallen in the park and ground his teeth too much. And the organization's response to the case, that it is only responsible for adoptions and not managing caregivers, has upset some people, including politicians.
这个说法我们没有办法接受，把安置的责任转借给本案失孕的保姆，这个保姆是由他们来选择的，责任是无法免除的。尤其在这个需要做定期的访视过程当中，他们做了没有？
Taipei Mayor Jiang Wan'an has weighed in on Facebook, saying the city should check up on children under nanny's care at least 6 times a year. Already, it seems the city government is planning to go even further.
维管办理收出养的单位应该要去强化它的访视的一个频率，我们建议是1个月至少2次。那至于保姆端的一个县市的主管机关，原来每3个月1次的一个访视，我们会增加为每个月至少1次。
Similar rule changes are in the works in neighboring New Taipei, but this whole case has left Taipei's social workers angry at everyone involved. They say police used excessive force by handcuffing a cooperating suspect and broke privacy rules by parading her past news cameras. They're angry at the media, too, for leaking personal info. They see the Child Welfare League Foundation as deflecting blame that it deserves. And they're angry most of all at local officials.
过到3月已经12的时候，突然间这个社会大众开始哗然说，怎么会有这件事情的时候，他们才跳出来说，我们要来检讨这件事情，而且检讨的时候，很多的时间是都就是没有去甚至会去责怪社工。
Feeling slighted and wondering if it could be their neck on the line next time something goes wrong, it's unclear if they will push back on expectations for them to put in more work with more in-person checkups. Ryan Wu and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Activists in Taiwan are calling on the country's lawmakers to craft rules to better protect people from police brutality. Rick Laut reports from the legislature.
More needs to be done to protect people here in Taiwan from police violence. That's the message from civil society groups protesting here outside the Legislative Yuan in Taiwan's capital, Taipei. It comes after two high-profile incidents of police brutality in recent weeks. One in which a 17-year-old says he was beaten and tasered by police during an interrogation, and another in which a suspected scooter thief died after allegedly being hit by a police baton.
那现在呢，就是台湾也没有一个独立的酷刑调查机制，由第三方的机关来做调查，因此这个酷刑发生在警察或者在警局，或者是说在监所内的时候，因为是一个封闭的环境，很难取得证据。
Incidents like this are rare in Taiwan, but the groups here say that they're on the rise. They're urging Taiwan to pass a law promising to adhere to the United Nations Conventions on Preventing Torture. A draft law is currently stuck in the legislature, and they say that these recent violent incidents are proof that action must be taken now. Eason Chen and Rick Lowett in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
A man has been arrested for allegedly threatening to behead President Tsai Ing-wen. The 26-year-old made that threat in an online post the day before January's elections. Police say the man used a VPN to try and hide his location, setting the IP address to the United States to avoid being tracked. Online threats against high-profile politicians have been growing in Taiwan, with recent bomb threats made against lawmakers. Taiwan's premier says there are no plans to allow absentee voting, despite opposition lawmakers' efforts to update the rules.
要做不在籍投票，我们需要在选务的加强，以及呢如何达成选举的秘密性，而且正确性跟公平性都需要来研议哈。所以目前行政院并没有这方面的规划。
Taiwan mandates in-person voting in people's registered hometowns. Opposition leaders say that this makes voting difficult for people living away from home or overseas. But ruling party lawmakers argue that without systems in place to validate votes, absentee voting could risk foreign interference, particularly from China, and thus undermine Taiwan's democracy. Donald Trump and Joe Biden, they are set for a rematch in this year's U.S. presidential election. President Biden and his predecessor have both secured enough delegates to become their party's candidates on November 5th. It's a tricky matchup, with polls showing that voters are unenthusiastic about either candidate. Trump, a Republican, he is facing multiple prosecutions, including over his involvement in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Meanwhile, Biden, a Democrat, he's being criticized over his age, his support for Israel, and his government's handling of immigration. Separately, U.S. President Biden has submitted his request for next year's defense budget, and that includes hundreds of millions of dollars for Taiwan. For more on this military aid, reporter Chris Gorin spoke with defense researcher William Zidong-Zong.
So, in its new budget request, the Biden administration has asked for $850 billion US dollars. Out of that, Taiwan will receive $100 million in military aid. But Biden has also requested another $500 million to replace the US's own stocks that are being transferred to Taiwan. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot compared to the nearly $20 billion in backlog deliveries that Taiwan is still waiting for. So, big picture, is this new $600 million a lot for the U.S. to spend on Taiwan?
Yes, the amount, I think the most important is just show the signs, the American determination to help Taiwan and try to, to send a signal to China and don't to do that. And I think in putting in practice, as I mentioned, it will mainly, I think, the focus about great anti-access and area denial, or we call the A2AD's capability Taiwan, and to build out Taiwan's the military resilience.
Do you feel that the money coming from the White House is enough to meet Taiwan's defense needs?
I think this is just in the beginning, and if really there have a contingency happen or situation escalated, and I think America will be increased this kind of the military assistance very dramatically. So I think don't just be missed by it's a small amount. It's just the beginning. I would see this as a very important sign.
That was Chris Gorin speaking with defense researcher William Zidong-Zong. The Taiwan Strait is one of the busiest transport channels in the world. That's why many countries are concerned about a potential conflict there. Jaime Ocon explains what would happen if China attempted a blockade of Taiwan.
Here in the southern city of Kaohsiung lies Taiwan's biggest harbor. More than 9 million shipping containers pass through here every year, making it a vital economic hub for both Taiwan and Asia as a whole. That's why many countries in the region are concerned about the growing number of Chinese warships operating around Taiwan. Their presence is seen as China threatening to invade Taiwan, which it claims as its own. But many analysts now say that China is more likely to use other means to take the country under its control.
By and large, the most likely scenario is what we described as a highly kinetic blockade. And that's where China starts that blockade with an opening salvo of missile strikes against assets in Taiwan.
That would entail China stopping all merchant ships from coming and going from the island, essentially squeezing Taiwan's resources and economy. A report by the China Power Project says a maritime blockade of Taiwan is more feasible for China than a full-scale invasion because it would be the least coercive way to achieve its goals. The report predicts Taiwan would only be able to survive a blockade for 3 months. But even if Taiwan was able to hold out for longer, the economic effects of a blockade would be devastating for the rest of the world.
And we'll just assume it was 40% successful. So we're not talking 100%, 40% successful. That would be cost 2.8 trillion on the global economy, and that's the equivalent of about 2.8% of global GDP.
That means a successful blockade would cost the world around $7 trillion, nearly 4 times what was lost during the 2008 financial crisis. The Institute of Economics and Peace estimates that a maritime blockade of Taiwan would shrink China's economy by 7%, while Taiwan's economy would plummet by almost 40%. And given the strength of Taiwan's semiconductor industry, which supplies more than 90% of the world's most advanced chips, analysts say that any move that disrupts the tech supply chain would likely prompt the US and other countries to respond.
I think the important thing is awareness needs to be raised so that everyone's really clear on just what the consequences of a blockade would be.
And that's leading Taiwan's military to increase its combat readiness. Port cities like Kaohsiung are crucial for Taiwan's economy because the island nation relies heavily on imports to sustain its economy. And that's why the military is doubling down and deploying some of the country's most advanced systems to protect these areas. Defending key infrastructure is becoming a top priority for the military, which is conducting several coastal defense drills near ports and major cities. It's also deploying more anti-ship missiles around the country with the goal of using this kind of precision-guided ammunition to defend against enemy warships.
精准的投射能力以及快速的机动能力，正好符合我海军水面作战机动速决、集中火力的作战原则，有效地将敌人牵起于海上。
While there are no signs of any imminent military action from China, much of the world is hoping that Taiwan's defense is strong enough to deter Beijing, since any disruption of trade here could see an unprecedented impact on the world's economy. Howard Zhang, Annie Xue, Scott Huang, and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up, growing calls to expand protections for the Galapagos Islands. Find out more after the break.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee, we make the news. Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.
For more stories from here in Taiwan and around the world, visit us on social media or follow our website at TaiwanPlus.com.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. A dispute has erupted in Taipei over a plan to hand over part of the city's oldest brewery to a university. It's the latest disagreement over urban renewal as city officials look to refurbish historic sites. Wesley Lewis has the details.
Taiwan beer, an iconic symbol of the country's heritage. But now tensions are brewing over a government proposal to hand over part of the company's Jianguo beer factory to National Taipei University of Technology. The plan is to repurpose land equal to about 3.5 American football fields right in central Taipei. And Taiwan Beer says the move will be good for the university, the company staff, and for local residents.
相信未来可以制造三赢啊，北科大能够有块新的校地来解决校地不足啊。第二个就是我们台酒的烟酒公司，我们的员工他们的工作权继续维持。第三个，我们的开放空间里面让附近的旅民他们都能够有休憩的空间。
The brewery was founded in 1919 during Taiwan's Japanese colonial period. It's a site steeped in history, and it's the birthplace of Taiwan beer. It currently neighbors a beer hall with a live music venue, forming a cultural park that welcomes amblers and beer drinkers alike. But some scholars worry repurposing it will cut it off from the public.
如果是这样被切割之后呢，我觉得我们所谓的啤酒文化园区的整体系统里面，从制造、酿造、游客的参访、体验、品尝这样的一个情境就会被切割掉。所谓的文化园区这个字的完整性大概就不可能存在了。
What's more, it's the last major active brewery left in Taipei, and workers' unions say the plan will disrupt their day-to-day operations.
电呢，也是在它的里面啊，变压器在它给它的里面，冷冻机、水塔水池，甚至瓦斯、锅炉都在给它的里面。你要叫我们怎么活？
The Brewers Union and academics have now signed a joint petition to keep the Jianguo Brewery as it is now. The renovation plan is only the most recent case to attract debate over urban renewal. A viaduct built in 1982 obscuring Taipei's historic North Gate led to years of protests by the public, leading planners to finally tear it down in 2016. Historic spaces like the Jianguo Brewery can be deeply meaningful to the public, and for some people, preserving the past means more than changing for the future. Chris Ma and Wesley Lewis for TaiwanPlus.
A Japanese rocket went up in flames just seconds after liftoff, dashing its developers' hopes of becoming the country's first private firm to put a satellite in orbit. The 23-ton rocket, dubbed Kairos, was built by Tokyo-based startup Space One, which aimed to shift satellite launches into the private sector. That rocket was carrying a mock-up of a government spy satellite that could take over for ones currently in orbit in case they fail. It marks a major setback for Japan's space aspirations. A powerful explosion at a restaurant in China has killed 2 people and injured 26. The suspected gas explosion happened at a fried chicken shop in a township just south of Beijing. It destroyed a 4-story building, leaving the area in rubble. Over 150 firefighters were dispatched to put out the flames, to clear debris, and carry out rescue work. Last year, China issued new guidelines on the use of gas appliances after a reported jump in deadly accidents involving gas leaks. India's government has just enacted a new citizenship law ahead of national elections. The controversial act has driven the country's Muslim minority to take to the streets in protest. Rosie Greninger reports.
Protests erupt across India in response to the government implementing a contentious citizenship law. The Citizenship Amendment Act offers refuge to religious minorities from 3 of India's neighbouring Muslim-majority countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan and Bangladesh, but has stirred up controversy as it excludes Muslims. Protesters say the legislation undermines India's foundation as a secular nation.
The Amendment Act is, as per my opinion, it is not right, because basically you are doing a partiality in religion of the in basis of the religion. So you are not including the Muslim community. So this is not the right thing to exclude the Muslim community in it.
But for some of India's refugee population, it's a cause for celebration. The amendment allows illegal immigrants from selected nations a fast track to naturalization if they've been in India for longer than 5 years.
हमारा मुल्क कोई नहीं था ना यहाँ मुल्क था ना कोई मुल्क नहीं था अभी जो भारत सरकार ने नागरिकता ला कर दी है तो हमारे लिए बहुत गौरव की बात है.
Originally passed in 2019, the law was shelved due to deadly nationwide demonstrations. Protesters said it violated the constitution to attach religion to citizenship law. And India's minority Muslim population, who faced widespread discrimination since Prime Minister Narendra Modi came into office in 2014, feared the law could be used in conjunction with the proposed National Register of Citizens for the government to marginalise the religion. But the Modi government insists it won't impact Muslims who are already citizens, and it is a humanitarian act to provide refuge to others who face persecution in their own country.
वो हमारे ही नागरिक थे, उनको नागरिकता देने का ही ये काम है, नागरिकता छीनने का नहीं है। विपक्ष क्यों विरोध कर रहा है मेरे समझ में नहीं आ रहा।
With the law pulled out of cold storage after 5 years, the timing of the implementation is being questioned as politically motivated. The opposition party have accused the government of pushing a polarising Hindu nationalist agenda to consolidate votes in the upcoming general election, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi is seeking a rare third term.
This is the first time that into the principle of citizenship, you are finding a law being brought in that actually discriminates by excluding people of one particular faith.
The law is being appealed in India's Supreme Court, but the slow-moving process is not expected to return any immediate action. But with elections just weeks away and Prime Minister Modi sitting in a favourable position in the polls, it seems there's little these protests can do to change the tide. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
A non-profit group has launched the world's largest methane tracker satellite into space.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
The Environmental Defense Fund designed the satellite to orbit the Earth every hour and a half to track methane, and that gas traps more heat than other greenhouse gases. Unlike other methane trackers, the group says that they will be completely transparent, making the data free to the public. The International Energy Agency says methane emissions from fossil fuels reached a near record high in 2023, and tracking emissions will help lead to better regulations.
This is a whole new game. It really creates an enormous leap forward in our ability to really understand greenhouse gas emissions.
Environmental groups and scientists are calling on the UN to expand protections for the Galapagos Islands. Bryn Thomas has the story.
British naturalist Charles Darwin said the Galapagos Islands were a little world within itself. The Ecuadorian archipelago, off the coast of South America, is home to 3,000 marine species, including sea turtles, hammerhead sharks, sea lions, and marine iguanas. In 1998, UNESCO designated the islands and their surrounding waters a World Heritage Site, protecting their ecosystem and creating one of the world's largest marine reserves. But just outside its boundaries, industrial fishing fleets operate as usual. Scientists say they pose a threat to animals whose migration takes them beyond the reserve's borders.
So it's hugely important that we protect areas where we have irreplaceable biological diversity, like places like Galapagos. But that means very little if we don't also consider how these areas are ecologically connected.
Environmental activists are teaming up with scientists to demonstrate these connections using DNA testing in and around Galapagos waters.
Los análisis de estas muestras nos permiten saber qué especies marinas han estado en esta área y han dejado algún tipo de rastro de ADN que va a ser identificado y amplificado mediante técnicas de biología molecular.
Bit by bit, they've been able to map a larger and more interlinked ecosystem that stretches far beyond the borders of the Galapagos Reserve.
The information which we're collecting now is kind of like putting together a big jigsaw puzzle because everything is integrated in some way. And if you're looking to prioritize the most important regions to start working, to know where those corridors are, you need to use genetics. So you can start to look at how particular populations are connected from one region to another using genetic analysis, genetic tools.
To protect these ecosystems, environmental group Greenpeace is calling on the UN to expand conservation around the islands using the High Seas Treaty. The UN treaty went into effect in June 2023. Once it's ratified by 60 countries, it could expand conservation areas to international waters that make up 60% of the world's oceans. This would allow for much larger nature reserves in waters outside of any country's jurisdiction. Greenpeace says Ecuador, Panama, Colombia, and Costa Rica have done much to protect the oceans within their jurisdiction, but the group is urging these countries to show leadership and ratify the agreement.
Necesitamos que por lo menos 60 gobiernos lo ratifiquen para que en esta conferencia de la ONU que se llevará a cabo en Francia en junio del 2025 se pueda ratificar y entrar en vigor. Al mismo tiempo, sabemos que no podemos esperar. Tenemos la meta de que el 30% de los océanos sean protegidos para el 2030.
30% by 2030 may be chasing the horizon. Right now, just 3% of the world's oceans are conserved, and only 2 countries, Palau and Chile, have ratified the High Seas Treaty. Whether protections will be extended to the world, or even a little world within itself, remains unclear. Luffy Lee and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for joining us here on TaiwanPlus News. Visit our website or follow us on social media for more of our stories. And before we go, check out these therapy dogs at work at Istanbul's airport. I'm Eric Gao, and I'll see you again tomorrow.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, download the TaiwanPlus app.